Alrighty, Stallions and Stallionettes, welcome to the Gamer Heaven. I'm your host, AK40 Kevin. We are back at it with Project Zero. This is part 2 in a 4-part series. In the first episode, I shared my screen on the PC and showed you how to shop for components to get the best price and also make sure there's no compatibility issues. And I introduced you to the parts or components of this build. As it is titled Zero, which is short for Zero Compromise, this PC is using some very high-end flagship parts. Today, we're going to start the hands-on building process by unboxing the case or chassis and mounting cooling fans. We're also going to prepare the motherboard by mounting 2 NVMe M.2 drives, 2 sticks of DDR5 Ram, our 12th generation i9 CPU, and installing an AIO or all-in-one water cooler. Without further ado, you know what to do. Let's build a PC. Mother of God, just look at the sheer size difference. This is an SFF or small form factor over here, but just looking at the sheer size difference between an SFF or small form factor and then the Antec torque over here is rated as an M-ATX or mid-ATX tower, but it is actually pushing dangerously close into full-size tower territory, which I'm not complaining about. It'll have fantastic cooling as it is a completely open air design and also it's massive. So there'll be plenty of surface area inside the case for that air to dissipate into the ambient air of my room. So my heating bill will be relatively low this winter as I can just run this PC. All the parts, components, tools, and accessories used in this build are linked in the description below. And all 4 of the episodes in the series are broken up into timestamps or chapters that you can skip around if you need to rewatch a certain section, or maybe you're just interested in one particular aspect of the build. However, if you are planning on building a PC, especially your first PC, I do recommend that you watch the video in its entirety as I sprinkle tips and tricks in throughout the entire video. Now, other than the mandatory components or parts of a PC, which we talked about in the last video, a couple of tools and accessories that I recommend you have before starting your build. First one is going to be a magnetized tip Phillips head screwdriver. You can actually magnetize and demagnetize your tools with a little block like this. Other than a full-size screwdriver, I do recommend if you're working on consoles, controllers, or PCs that you do have a small toolkit, something like this that you can get into very intricate, tight areas, maybe around your motherboard. You are also going to need thermal paste to cool your CPU. It sandwiches in between the CPU cooler and the actual processor. Now, granted, most CPU coolers, whether you go the air-cooled route or water-cooled, they usually include some type of basic thermal paste in the kit. In fact, in this build, I used the included thermal paste that came with my AIO. However, it doesn't hurt to have your own thermal paste in case you have a little whoops-a-daisy while you're doing your build. I will have linked in the description below some very high-quality thermal paste from Corsair. I do also strongly recommend getting some kind of a PC hardware kit. This is $8 on Amazon, will be linked in the description below, and this has everything from motherboard standoffs to fan screws to insulation gaskets. This thing's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and deadlift this box up onto the desk. Lift with your lower back in a swift jerking motion and completely take your legs out of the equation, I've always said. So since this is a ridiculous case or chassis, we need a ridiculous unboxing knife. This is Damascus steel, a gift from my dad, so thank you very much. The blade's a little dirty. I need to do a little restoration job on her. But who's got time? I've got YouTube videos to shoot, PCs to build, controllers to dick around with. Now, I'm very curious how this case is actually packaged, considering it does have acrylic or glass panels, and it is a very expensive case at $360 US. I'm expecting this thing to be packaged quite nicely, but sometimes there's a big disconnect between expectations and reality. So, woo, 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 woo! Good catch, Kevin. This is actually pretty premium roastadore. You have your instruction manual, you have some hardware in here. Everything does have a nice little foam house or cutout. They do also have a film or sheet over them to protect them from fingerprints, micro scratches, etc. Holy mother of God. So some pretty heavy duty packaging for a pretty heavy duty case. And I do mean heavy, weight on screen here, as well as the dimensions. Maybe just the largest M-ATX or mid tower I've ever seen in my life. You've got your hardware here, which is of course metal. You are a big girl and I'll wrestle with you. Bring it on over. Holy moly, she's wedged in there good. Let's pull out some of this foam. I think it's holding it, these foam blocks. Never mind, you can't. It's all one piece. Now let's get this box out of here real quick. Now, if you see me sweating profusely throughout this video, it's a couple of factors. 1, I'm quite out of shape currently. 2, this build is super hot. And 3, it's warm in this room. I'm in Florida and I can't have my air conditioning or ceiling fan running while I record these videos because, well, you're definitely gonna hear that. And the only thing I want you to hear is the pops and sizzles of the motherboard when I miscorrectly plug something. You have all your plugs for the front I/O over here. You have 2 USB 3.0s, a USB-C 3.1, a 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as a 3.5mm mic input, power button, which I think also doubles as your reset button. That has a nice tactile click to it. Get a listen to this. Now let's go ahead and crack into our motherboard. This doesn't deserve the Damascus steel. This is just going to get this little titanium joint over here. And it also reminds you that you purchased this in a bundle. This is technically sold from Micro Center, but it's through Amazon as the vendor. For those who dare to get an expensive motherboard. Oh, hello. Let's get you a little overhead bird's eye view. Don't worry about those little cables down there. Just pretend you don't see them. I just let my buddy borrow my capture card that's usually plugged to my PS5, so I've got 2 HDMI cables dangling down there. Really ugly, and for somebody like myself that's a snob about cable management, it drives me crazy, but we'll just pretend it's not there. So this is wrapped in an anti-static bag. Now, speaking on that topic, this is the 7th PC I've built. I've also taken apart consoles and controllers. I've never worn one of those static bracelets, and I've had no issues transferring static electricity to my fingers, to any components and ruining them. I do have carpet in my room here, but I'm not shuffling my feet back and forth. And before I touch any electrical components, I do ground myself by touching some bare metal. I thought there'd be some cables or something in here, but that's just to keep your motherboard from not sliding around. It does also label in here that this is an anti-static packaging, which is going to have your accessory box. They do not make getting into this thing easy, I'll tell you that right now. You've got some zip ties for cable management. However, I don't use zip ties anymore. They're a pain in the ass if you need to remove them. So I prefer to use Velcro tiebacks or cable tubes and cable trays underneath the desk for cable management. This is the antenna that can go on top of your case or tower to extend the range of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. This is a little pad for M.2 drives. You've got some hardware in each one of these bags. You've got some SATA cables for connecting hard drives or SSDs, or anything that uses a SATA cable. This is the graphics card holder, so this is somewhat of a brace, which we are going to need. Considering that GPU is freakishly heavy, we do not want any motherboard sag where it's damaging our PCIe slot by having all that excess weight not supported. And then you've got, wow, a whole bunch of goodies under here. I guess you would expect with a flagship motherboard that it's gonna have a ton of goodies with it. That's pretty cool. It's got their socials down there and a little description of how badass their company is, of course. These are all stickers. There's about 5 or 6 of them on there. It even comes with a keychain, which actually looks pretty sick. This might actually be integrated in the case hanging off the side of it. Kind of like one of those key tags that say remove before flight. Then you also have a Frisbee here, so if your dog wants to play fetch or anything. Oh no, this is a compact disc. I haven't seen one of these in a while. Most modern PCs, this one included, does not have a disk drive, so you are going to download these drivers online. Now the motherboard will work right out of the box with older firmware, but I do recommend immediately one of the first things you do is updating the firmware on your motherboard, as well as the drivers for your GPU and any other components. You have your instruction manual here, which is rather large. It's broken into chapters. And I do recommend, as I mentioned during the first part or first video when we were introducing the components, that you do keep your instruction manual for at least your case and your motherboard. If you throw out all the rest, keep those two, because anytime you go to change any accessories, peripherals, those will break down what pins and plugs to use. But as mentioned in the previous video, I recommend you keep all the instruction manuals for your components, because in the back, there is usually a card that you can fill out to activate your warranty. If there's not a physical card, go onto the manufacturer's website and you'll enter your serial number and register that way to activate your warranty for all of these components. So you will notice as this case towers over my shoulder that I have removed the retro consoles from the desk to give us a little bit more working space, as we are going to lay this bad boy on its side when we install the motherboard. But before we get there, I want to showcase a couple features of this motherboard that make this thing an absolute beast, even in the 690 segment where there are some top tier cards. I'm fully supporting it weight wise, so it's not getting its full weight down here on the bottom. This Mobo is as future proof as they can be, as it does have PCIe 5.0. This top slot is always going to be where you mount your graphics card, as this top PCIe slot versus the others is going to give you the fastest speeds. Also, you might hear PCIe slots be called lanes. People will say things like, oh, my PCIe lane. It just means another slot in the motherboard. And with a lot of high-end motherboards, you will also have some kind of a support bracket or a quick release system. This also does support DDR5 Ram, and that is all it supports. You cannot use DDR4 Ram on this Mobo. This also has support for the 12th generation CPUs, which is good because that's what we have is an i9 12900K. Same thing with the CPU support. It only supports 12th generation Intel, so no prior generations. But that's all pretty standard in the high-end 690 segment. This motherboard takes it a step further. Of course, you have addressable RGB in there that you can control in the ASUS software, but this motherboard can actually support 5 NVMe M.2 drives, 3 on the motherboard itself, and then with this hyper adapter, which is quite heavy as it does have a metal heatsink, you can add an additional 2 M.2s, and it is recommended in the instruction manual that you install this in the bottom PCIe slot, and by doing that, you are able to get Gen 4 NVMe speeds out of this bottom slot here. Also with this motherboard, if you have all the NVMe slots taken with a drive, it is not reducing your speed whatsoever. There are other motherboards, even in in the 690 segment that will actually taper back or limit some of the read and write speeds if you do have all of the slots taken. Next up, this is one of the coolest motherboards, and I mean literally temperature-wise. This has awesome capacitors and also several heat mitigating accessories. Next up, this also does have an LED display, which is for error codes directly on the motherboard. So it'll give you a code which you can look up in your instruction manual and be like, oh, the RAM isn't properly seated. Oh, something is undervolting. Oh, there's a faulty capacitor. So that's awesome that that's right on the board. Now, there is no motherboard power and reset buttons on here, which is weird because other cards in the segment do offer that. Other than that, this has a slew of fan headers, SATA cable ports, and USB 3.0 support. Also, in the back of the card, you will notice that this already has an IO shield installed, which is very convenient. And also, there is an absolute slew of ports and plugs back here. Some of the most notable: 2 USB-C 3.1 ports, 10 USB-A ports of the 3.0 and 2.0 variety, Wi-Fi 6E support, 2.5G Ethernet port, full surround sound suite including an optical audio out, a clear CMOS button, and also a BIOS flashback button, which is fantastic if you are using this card for overclocking and mistakes were made. Maybe you cranked up that wattage just a little bit too much. You can go ahead and hit that BIOS flashback. It'll take you back to the last properly used setting. Last but not least, a fantastic convenience feature is you have this quick release button for your PCIe 5.0 slot where your graphics card is going to be mounted. So once you've seated your card, this lever will snap into place, and then you press this button to release it. So if you are somebody that swaps out GPUs for benchmarking, or you ever need to take out your card to clean it or whatever, you just hit this little button on the side and you unseat your card. Now let's go ahead and remove these stickers. Might be a little ASMR for you guys. Also, the gamer marketing hype on this thing is insane. The game to end all games. Game first, work second. What a beautiful Mobo. So we're gonna go ahead and install our random access memory or RAM sticks. And before I even broke into the package, I looked at the instruction manual for the motherboard, and it will give you the configuration of what slots you are going to slide these into. Now it does show if you're running 2 RAM sticks, which we are, that you are going to use slot 2 and 4, which is technically called A2 and B2. If you're only running 1 stick, it's going to be an A1, which is the far left. And if you're going to be running 4 sticks, there's 4 slots. Fill them all up. Fill her up. This RAM, the Patriot Viper Venom 32GB DDR5 6200 MHz kit, was sent out for review and to be part of this build. So thank you for supporting the channel. And you'll be getting my full unlock thoughts on this unlock RAM in the near future. Now this version does have RGB. They also have a version that's about $50 cheaper, same speeds, but does not have RGB, but they sent me out the good stuff. Because we all know that RGB adds frames per second to your rig and inches to your ego. So as you can see, there's a little cutout or notch in the bottom that is slightly off center, which means that you can only slide these in one way. So again, we're using the 2nd and 4th slot. You are going to open up these quick release levers. And as you can see on this motherboard, these ones are fixed or stationary. They do not move. However, these ones do. And installing RAM is one of the easiest parts of a PC build because you can't really mess it up other than putting it in the wrong slot and then wondering, why isn't my PC booting? You got to read the instruction manual of your motherboard, big dog. So you are going to line up this notch and then you are going to press on each side and you will hear a nice satisfying click. That's the sound of you breaking your motherboard. Just kidding. That's the RAM seating. Beautiful 4K resolution. Ooh, that first one wasn't actually seated. You got to give it a little push, a little muscle. I was scared. There's no room for fear in the gamer heaven. And as you can see, when I snap those RAM sticks into place, it actually closed this lever. These ones can remain open or you can close them. Dealer's choice. Now we're going to install our CPU or central processing unit, which of course is the 12900K, the 12th generation Intel i9 with its crazy gold packaging. So you have a little sticker down here in the bottom, again reminding you that you bought this in a bundle. All the parts of this build are linked in the description below, so if you are interested in doing a similar or identical build, or you just want 1 or 2 of the components that I'm working with, they're down there for ease of use. And this will open up like a hinge, like that, and open up like that, and oh my good God. Now, if that isn't a premium CPU, I don't know what is. It's smaller than I thought. I've heard that before. So you've got some foam in here keeping your processor in place. Now, installing a CPU is very simple. You are going to slot it into the CPU socket on your motherboard, but things do vary a little bit for AMD and Intel. The main difference is that on AMD processors, there are pins on the CPU, as where with Intel processors, as you can see, there's just metal pads on the bottom, and the pins are on the motherboard. Either way, whether it's on your CPU or your motherboard, you do not want to bend those pins. In fact, I wouldn't really even recommend touching them. There's no need to. You're going to handle your processor from the corners, from the outside, and it should just drop in like the good Lord intended. I'm actually going to remove the RAM stick so you can see a little bit better. Now you are going to take this metal lever, remove it like that. You do have this little plastic cover here that is labeled remove as the processor pushes it out of the way, but we're just gonna go ahead and remove it now. Now this is your CPU slot for an Intel processor, and as you can see, the pins are on the motherboard. These pins are very fragile, so please do not touch them. You are going to handle your CPU from the outside. Now you will notice in the bottom left-hand corner of the CPU, there is a small arrow, and on the CPU socket, there is also a metal arrow. These are going to line up. Now just carefully lower your CPU until it drops into place, like that. Now return this metal bracket and pull down the lever. You got to use a little bit of force. Our CPU is seated. Go ahead and get that RAM back in there. Gordon Ramsay. RAM 1500. Installing a couple of NVMe drives for storage on this motherboard, you are going to remove this metal heatsink by the PCIe 5.0 slot. You will see that there is a thermal pad already applied. Peel off the sticker to reveal that. I took off the heatsink that was on this NVMe since we're using the motherboard's heatsink, and I peeled the sticker off this M.2, which you generally don't need to do because they are metal heat conductive stickers. However, this one seemed to be a standard plastic sticker and would not get a good seal with the thermal pad. Now you're going to line up the notch or cutout in the M.2 and firmly press until you hear a click, and then it will be springing up like a little diving board. Usually you'll use a tiny screw to hold down the other side. However, on this motherboard, they have little plastic clips. Then remove the sticker protecting the thermal pad on the top heatsink and screw back in with the 2 included screws, going back and forth to evenly distribute pressure and make sure you get a good seal with the pads. Then do the same thing with this bottom heatsink. Now having 2 separate thermal pads is very convenient for me because one of the 3 NVMEs I'm putting in this build is not ready yet, as it is in my other PC, and at a later time I can peel off the sticker for that thermal pad. Consult your motherboard's instruction manual for the rated speeds of all the M.2 slots. You want to put your fastest NVMe M.2 in the slot that will take advantage of it, and put your slower ones in older slots like Gen 3 or 4. Remove the protective sticker for the thermal pad on the heatsink, and reapply the 2 screws. Now we're going to install 3 120mm cooling fans into the front of our case. We are going to orient them so they are intake fans, and then we are going to have 2 exhaust fans and a radiator on the top of the chassis. You are going to line them up with these metal holes and tighten them in firmly. So the wires aren't in our way from the front I/O. I do recommend tucking them off to the side like this. As for installing case fans, you want to have positive or at least neutral air pressure. You never want to have negative pressure. What this means is you want to have the same, if not more, intake fans than exhaust fans. So if you're running 4 fans, you could go 3 intake, 1 exhaust, or 2 intake, 2 exhaust. If you're running 5 fans, you could do 3 intake, 2 exhaust. Basically, you want to have the same, if not more, intake fans to make sure you have positive pressure. Granted, in an open air chassis like this, there's no real pressure because it's not a sealed case, but still you want that intake air coming in. So how do you know which way the air is actually going to be pushing in your fans, so you make sure you install them the right way so they're not just blowing out of the front of the case? Well, there's a couple of ways. Some fans actually have an arrow which shows you which way the airflow goes. This one does not. But as you can tell, the mounting bracket or frame is on this side as the fans are exposed on this side, and also the wiring is on this end as well. Plus you can tell by the actual curvature of the fan blades. As you can see, they are curved kind of like a half pipe for you skaters out there. The curved end is where the air is getting sucked in towards. So those are 3 ways to tell. If there's an arrow, awesome, makes it easy. If not, look for the mounting bracket as well as the wiring. And lastly, you can look at the curvature of the blades. So we know that this orientation is going to be intake fans, or if I wanted them to be exhaust fans, I'd flip them this way. So we are going to install 3 120mm intake fans in the front, and then have the 2 fans on our all-in-one or AIO exhausting out of the top. Now we do recommend having a magnetized screwdriver. If it is not magnetized, you can get a little magnetized block. It's about $6 on Amazon, and it will magnetize or demagnetize your tools. Now to install the fans, you can either have them on the inside of this frame or on the outside. I'm going to have them on the outside to give me a little bit more room inside the case or chassis, so I'm going to remove this front panel by unscrewing these 2 Phillips head screws on each side. Might hit you with a dank time lapse with a banger of a soundtrack. Looks like the fender on a dirt bike, or some armor on a Gundam wing, or Zoid. Do-do-do-do, riddle-little-doot-doo. There we go. Do-do-do-do. Give me a screw. Diddle-little-doot-doo. There we go. Get her started with my fingers, and then finish her off with the old screw. Perfect. She's installed and good to go. And you can also position these by sliding them upward and downward. So I'm going to wait to fully tighten this fan in until I get the one that's going to be underneath it, right next to it, so I can line them up and make sure that they both have clearance. Now you want these fans snug, but you don't want to over tighten them as they are just plastic and you could break them. Get on my tip. This is a gorgeous face you're seeing right now. Oh, I hear a car pulling in. I think my girlfriend's here. Sweet. She's going to have to understand that Daddy's in the middle of a PC build, and that takes priority. Now, as far as case fans, there's actually two different methods to get them up and running. The first one is plugging fans directly into the fan headers on the motherboard, which are going to be either 3 or 4 pins, and they are going to be labeled fan 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now, by taking this method, you are able to control the RPM or speed of fans, and also create different fan curves that will increase fan speed as the temperature of your PC rises. Or you can use a system with a control module like we're using that allows you to plug 10 fans into this control unit, and then this is controlled via a remote control, where you can change things like the RGB lighting and also the speed of the fans. Now, it is slightly more complicated, but you still can monitor and control fans that use a control module other than using the remote by following this diagram on screen here. However, most of these kits that come with several fans and then a control block or module, a central hub, will come with an instruction manual that will specify exactly what pins to plug into on the motherboard. Generally, it's going to be SYS fan 1 or system fan 1, and then you are just going to plug that into the module and have all the other fans running off that. So your PC is tricked into thinking that it's only one fan, but really it's controlling the RPM or speed of all the fans connected to that hub. If you don't want to use a control module, you want to go directly off the fan headers or fan pins on the motherboard, but you have several fans, more cooling fans than you have fan plugs on the motherboard, you can always run splitters. And in your system software, it'll recognize that as one fan, but it's controlling 2 or 3 fans that are off that splitter. So technically, if you have 2 fan plugs or headers on your motherboard, by running a 3-way splitter on each, you could have 6 fans and bypass an external control module like we're using in this build. And whenever your CPU is doing some productivity work, like rendering a video or doing some gaming, your CPU fan, whether that's an air cooler or a water cooler, AIO or custom loop, will increase its fan speeds on the radiator. For this build, we are going with the control module method. However, down the road, I most likely will remove these cheap generic fans and install some Noctua fans directly on the motherboard's headers, so I can walk you through both methods of installing case fans. Now, try to have a little more attention to detail than I did. I actually had to uninstall all of these fans and rerun the wires because I had one of the wires for the front IO ports, which are these USB and 3.5mm audio plugs, as well as your power button. One of them was a little bit pinched or crimped, didn't do any damage. And also, I wanted to cleanly run the fan wires to where no wires are actually exposed or visible. So take your time, run your wires cleanly, and you won't have to redo your work. Now, as for installing a CPU cooler, if you are taking the air-cooled route like this ThermalTake UX100, you will have your air cooler, which is basically a heat sink or heat pipes, and some type of an exhaust fan. And you are going to plug this into the pin on your motherboard that is labeled CPU fan. Now, a lot of times CPU coolers will come with thermal paste already pre-applied and will have a little protective film. Make sure you do not touch that thermal paste, and you do not need to add your own. You just peel off the cover and stick it on your CPU, and then you will tighten it in a crisscross pattern with whatever mounting brackets or adapters they included in the packaging. Now, a lot of coolers, especially AIOs or water coolers, do not have thermal paste or pads applied, so you need to source your own, and I would not recommend skimping and getting some cheap or crappy thermal paste. They do come in little syringe-looking applicators like this. You will pop off the protective tip or cover, and then squeeze this onto your CPU. I will show you exactly how much and where to apply this thermal paste. Now, another common cooling solution for PC parts is thermal pads. However, generally thermal pads aren't used on CPUs. I've actually never seen thermal pads used on CPUs. It's always going to be paste. Pads are usually used on GPUs, specifically around the VRAM or video RAM, the memory of the graphics card. Just tighten the CPU cooler snugly, but don't jack it down as hard as you can. You don't really need to show off how many gallons of milk you drank as a young lad and how much calcium you have coursing in your bones or anything like that. It's not a strongest man competition or anything. Just tighten it down snugly. And the same thing applies with the fans. You want to go in a crisscross pattern, and you want them snug, but not really tightened down as hard as you possibly can. I'm going to give you an overhead or bird's eye view, and we're going to go ahead and put this motherboard into this case. Now, this case already does have pre-installed standoffs. In fact, this actually has fixed standoffs that are like welded or soldered on the case, so thank God they do line up with the holes on the motherboard, but I've never actually seen a case or chassis have fixed motherboard standoffs. Usually you have to either screw them in yourself or they're pre-installed, but you can unscrew them if you have a different size motherboard, so maybe an MATX or an EATX. Now, I do strongly recommend that you pick yourself up up a little PC hardware kit. This is $8 on Amazon and is linked in the description below. But this is awesome because a lot of times the case or motherboard you buy might not have all the hardware you need. And this has everything from fan screws to, of course, what we're talking about right now, which is motherboard standoffs, which look just like this. This end is going to thread into your case or chassis, and then you set your motherboard on this side here, and then you will have another screw that holds your motherboard in place, kind of sandwiches it in there. Additional standoffs. Also, you don't want to fully tighten down all these screws just yet for the motherboard. We'll come back around and secure them snugly later, but for now, just make sure that they're all aligned and whatnot, you know? And these ones right here, hopefully you can see that, are a little bit snug. So this is where it's incredibly important to have a magnetized tip, or else these would be virtually impossible to get at. And you do want to use all of the possible screws or tie-offs for your motherboard, so don't leave any blank or unused. You feel me? Jaw feel? I'm not feeling the audio quality right now because this is with a, iPhone, no microphone attached. Now it's a little bit hard with these intricate cuts here. You might actually need to go through the case or chassis. My God, I was blocking a whole bunch of light for you guys. I'm sorry, but not over tightened. Let's just go ahead and go back over all these screws here. Make sure that motherboard is affixed and ready for business. Hot to trot. Oh yeah, she's not going anywhere. That's in there good. Make sure I didn't miss any holes. Any holes that were available for me have been filled. That probably would have been a more beneficial angle there, a little more zoomed in, but I'm a rookie.
Thanks to ThermalTake for sending out the Tough Liquid Ultra 240 AIO.
A sleek, compact, and rugged 240mm radiator and a 2-in-1 pump and block that has an LCD screen with more resolution than my TV. It also rotates, so no matter how you wedge this in your case, you're going to be able to put your screen right side up. This is going to plug into what is labeled as AIO pump on the motherboard, and then these two fans are going to plug into CPU fan and CPU fan opt, or optional, OPT. So first things first, we need to bolt our fans to our radiator over here, which you can do on either side. So if you want to do like a push-pull, one intake, one exhaust, you can do that. Or if you wanted them blowing in as intakes, I don't know why you would do that, considering the radiator is going to be a lot of heat. You kind of want to dissipate that through the top or back of your case. So you are going to use this EVGA 1700, which is what the motherboard also recommended for a cooler, so that's good. That's correlating with both the instruction manual for the motherboard as well as the case and for this CPU cooler as well, so that's good that they're all in cahoots together. We recommend using an EVGA 1700 after installing the motherboard into the chassis. It's in there. Now, if your case or chassis does not have access to the bottom of the motherboard, then you will need to do this step prior to putting the motherboard in, but luckily this case is designed for gamers, so of course they figure you're gonna have some badass AIO or all-in-one cooler here, so you have access to the back of the motherboard while it is mounted, and that is fantastic because we are going to take this mounting bracket, which is labeled LGA 1700, if you can see that up the bottom there, which if the camera will focus, there she is. That is what the motherboard, the CPU, and the case are all recommending using, so you're going to peel off these two strips, and then it installs just like that. There are cutouts or holes for it. Sorry if my hand's a little shaky, I'm not on a gimbal or anything, and it will install like that. So I'm not going to lie, this was actually my first time installing an AIO. Every other PC build I've ever done for myself for friends, we've used air coolers, but it was incredibly simple. I have half a brain cell that was dropped on my head as a child for sport, and I had no issue whatsoever. The very first step is to find out where you're going to mount this radiator, on the top, on the back, on the front. Kind of play around with your cable management and where you want your tubes to run. Then you're going to mount your fans. They make it very easy because they are labeled with arrows showing where the airflow goes. I'm using both fans for exhaust, and they will be blowing through the radiator. If you're going all the way through the fans into the radiator like I am in this build, you are going to use the long screws, and this is by far the most common fan setup for an AIO, is to have the 1, 2, or 3 fans blowing through the radiator in an exhaust capacity. I did have to remove the metal shroud or cover from the top of the case to get access to these screw holes to mount the radiator. Then you're going to slide on this adapter, read the instruction manual if you have an AMD or Intel CPU so you know which hardware to use. You are going to hear a satisfying click when it snaps into place. Then you're going to mount the screw standoffs. They will be different depending on which adapter or mounting block used. Then you are going to apply the thermal paste. The old technique used to put about a dime-sized drop right in the middle, but with CPUs being larger and also hotter, the most popular technique is now the 5-dot, where you put a small dot in each corner and a slightly bigger dot in the middle. It's virtually impossible to use too much thermal paste with the included kit because they only give give you enough paste for one CPU. It's a single-use applicator. Now, granted, my thermal paste job wasn't the prettiest in this build. However, it is going to spread out when you screw on the CPU cooler, and it will get full coverage on the CPU. Then you have these heavy-duty spring screws, which are threaded in the bottom, and these will screw into those standoffs we installed earlier. You do not want to move the CPU cooler once it's made contact with the thermal paste because it will smear around in an uneven pattern. Tighten the 4 screws in a crisscross or star pattern, corner to corner. Start by hand and then grab yourself a screwdriver. Keep going back and forth until they're all snug, but you don't need to use all your muscle. Thanks for hanging out with me while I build this PC. Hopefully you learned a thing or two, or at least got entertained. In the next part of the series, we are going to install the GPU, that 3090 Ti. We are going to put in our 1300 watt power supply and get everything connected to power. We are going to install an SSD as well as a mechanical hard drive. I know I said I wasn't going to use a mechanical in this build, but I think it's important to show how to install every type of storage. M.2 NVMEs, SSDs, and mechanical hard drives. Maybe some floppy drives as well. I think I got Oregon Trail on a floppy disk somewhere. We'll play that. Then I'm going to show you a couple of methods to boot your PC and upload the operating system. In this case, we're using Windows 10 Pro. I will also show you how to activate Windows with an OEM factory key that is substantially cheaper than buying it through Microsoft. But we're not pirating or installing a keygen or some janky stuff like that. But we're also not paying $100 for a Windows 10 Pro. Then I will show you a couple of tweaks you can make in the BIOS, which is the control panel of your motherboard, to enable XMP, which is an overclock on the RAM, so you get your full rated advertised speeds, and also do any troubleshooting and fix any small issues that might arise. Then in part 4, we are going to do some glamour shots of the completed build as well as some benchmarks, and wrap up with some final tips and tricks and how to maintain your PC over time. This has been AK40 Kevin in the gamer heaven, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace. If you enjoyed the video, liking it helps it to get seen by more gamers. This information will reach and assist them as well, which in turn helps me grow this little channel, which I do greatly appreciate. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover news in the gaming community and industry, tutorials helping you get set up streaming and YouTubing, as well as honest gaming product reviews, keyboards, mice, headsets, controllers, mics, chairs, etc. There are some hefty exclusive discount codes found only in the description of my videos and only for the audience here at Gamer Heaven. Check out Into the AM for some of the sickest looking and most comfortable cloth to ever grace my gaming giblets. If you don't want to be scorching your corneas with harmful blue light, check out Gamer Advantage, the only blue light glasses on the market that look sexy and actually work. If you're looking for a custom controller that'll blow the competition's tits back, AIM definitively has the best bang for buck or price to performance when it comes to Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch controllers. Nope, they don't do Switch, but they do gaming mice. I said doo-doo. I have links to all my other platforms and socials in the description below. If you need a quick laugh or blast of gamer adrenaline, check my short form videos out at TikTok. To get in touch with myself and the stallions and stallionettes of Gamer Heaven, join the community Discord, and check me out at twitch.tv where I go live every other leap year on a blue moon if it falls into an odd calendar number, and my pH balance is on point. Just kidding, starting June I'm going to be live streaming a lot. Thanks for watching. This has been AK40 Kevin hosting Gamer Heaven, and I'll see you tomorrow because I upload daily, all the time, 60% of the time, sometimes, most of the time. Peace.